He hugged his owner with his last breath. Everyone thought it was the end. The vet moved to inject the final dose, but stopped. What she found inside his chest wasn't silence. It was something fighting to live. And that changed everything. The rain had been falling for hours, steady, cold, and unrelenting, turning the windows of the small veterinary clinic into streaked mirrors of a stormy night. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed low, casting a sterile blue glow across steel cabinets and medical trays. In the center of the room stood a metal exam table, and on it, motionless, lay Shadow. The once mighty Belgian Malinois was barely recognizable. His glossy black coat had faded to dull charcoal, his ribs too visible beneath thinning fur. Each breath came with a wheeze, shallow and uneven like the last few notes of a dying song. A soft blanket covered his legs, but nothing could hide the truth. Shadow was slipping away. Evan stood beside him, hands trembling as they rested on the dog's chest. His fingers curled gently around one of Shadow's paws, holding it like something sacred. He hadn't said much since they walked in. What could he say? Every word felt like goodbye, and he wasn't ready. "You pulled me out of the fire," Evan whispered, his voice cracking, "and I can't do a damn thing to pull you out of this." His eyes burned, not from smoke this time, but from a kind of helplessness that clawed at his throat. Shadow had been more than a partner. He was Evan's lifeline, his reason to get up in the morning, his shadow in every sense of the word. When Evan's back gave out, when the pain from the old injury made him feel less than human, Shadow had stayed. Through the surgeries, the nights of silence, the moments when Evan came close to giving up, it was this dog who refused to leave his side. Now, Evan was the one holding vigil, waiting for the moment that Hart would finally give up, waiting to feel the paw go limp. Shadow stirred, barely. His eyelids fluttered, revealing cloudy eyes that once scanned burning forests and saved lives. They blinked slowly, then fixed on Evan's face, still searching, still recognizing, still holding on. The air in the room was thick with grief. Behind them, a young nurse stood frozen near the medicine cart, her hands clenched around a folded towel. She turned away, wiping her eyes, pretending to check supplies. But the truth was too loud to ignore. Time moved differently in that room. The ticking of the wall clock felt cruel. Evan leaned forward until his forehead rested gently against Shadow's. He didn't care that his tears were soaking the dog's fur. He just needed to be close. "You don't have to be brave anymore," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I've got you now." Outside, the rain kept falling, drumming a steady rhythm against the roof like a soft funeral march. Inside, everything else held its breath. For a moment, Evan thought Shadow had gone completely still. The rise and fall of his chest had slowed to nearly nothing, and the light in his eyes was dimming like a candle caught in the wind. Evan's hand trembled as he stroked the side of the dog's face, whispering soft things that barely reached his own ears. He didn't even notice Dr. Harper step back into the room. Then, it happened. With a soft grunt, barely more than a breath, Shadow moved. Not much, but enough. He shifted his weight and slowly, shakily lifted both front paws. Evan froze. The paws didn't fall away this time. Instead, they reached up, deliberate, trembling, and curled around Evan's shoulders. Like an embrace, like a goodbye. Evan's heart shattered. A sob ripped from his chest as he collapsed over the dog, arms wrapping tight around Shadow's frail frame. The blanket slipped to the floor, his face pressed into the smoky fur that stilled faintly of pine and ash. The same fur he'd clung to when they crawled out of that wildfire together. "I'm here," Evan choked out. "I'm right here, boy." Behind them, Dr. Harper stood silently. She held the syringe in one hand, her expression soft but steady. She had seen this moment more times than she could count, yet it never stopped being sacred, painful, human. She waited, respectfully, allowing the two a final moment. Evan lifted his head just enough to meet her eyes, tears streaking down his face. "You can let go now," he whispered to Shadow. "It's okay, you can rest." Dr. Harper stepped closer, the syringe steady in her gloved hand. Her voice was calm, low, the kind of tone meant to ease the sting of finality. "When you're ready," she said gently. Evan nodded through the tears, still cradling Shadow's trembling frame. He didn't trust his voice anymore. Everything in him was breaking. She leaned in, then stopped. Something changed in her face, her brow furrowed, and without a word, She set the syringe back on the tray with a soft metallic clink. Her hands went to her coat pocket, pulling out a stethoscope. Evan blinked, confused. "What is it?" Harper didn't answer. She pressed the bell of the stethoscope to Shadow's chest and closed her eyes. The room fell silent again. Except this time it wasn't just grief holding its breath. It was something else. Tension, question. And then she heard it. Not the fluttering collapse of a dying heart, but something erratic, uneven, alive. A rhythm not giving up. A beat refusing to fade. She shifted the scope slightly, listening again. There it was, thump, thump, pause, thump. Faint, but present. Shadow wasn't done. Harper quickly examined his gums. Pale, yes, but not the cold gray hue of shutting down. Something wasn't adding up. Her eyes darted to Evan. "His heart," she murmured. "It's still fighting." Evan stared at her, stunned. The weight in his chest flickered with something dangerously close to hope. Dr. Harper moved fast. She grabbed a thermometer and slipped it gently beneath Shadow's front leg, her eyes never leaving his face. The display beeped after a few seconds. She read it, then read it again. "His temperature's low," she muttered, almost to herself, "but not low enough for shutdown, not classic organ failure." She turned, walked briskly to the nearby counter, and began tapping into the clinic computer. Evan stood by, watching with wide, confused eyes. "What's going on?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I need to check something," Harper replied, not looking up. "His last blood panel, when was that?" 2 days ago, Evan said quickly. "You ran it when we first brought him in." The results appeared on screen. Harper's eyes narrowed. One marker, a key white blood cell count, had jumped dramatically. Too dramatically. It wasn't a natural progression of age or failure. It was a red flag. "Infection," she whispered. "What?" Evan stepped closer. "This spike," she said, pointing at the screen, "this is consistent with an acute bacterial infection, fast, aggressive, not old age, not a slow decline." She turned back to Shadow and felt along his abdomen, listening again with the stethoscope, piecing together the silent puzzle his body was screaming out. "Has he eaten or drunk anything strange recently?" she asked sharply, urgency now rising in her voice. Evan's brow furrowed. "No, I mean, nothing out of the ordinary. Wait," he paused, eyes flicking as memory returned. "There was this spot just outside the cabin, an old tool shed. A puddle formed near it after the last rain. I caught him drinking from it." Harper looked up. "Anything around it? Rodents? Wildlife?" Evan nodded slowly. "Yeah, we found 2 raccoons dead out back a few days ago. We figured it was just nature." She straightened, face tightening with realization. That puddle could have been contaminated. Leptospirosis or worse. Evan stared at her, the weight of what he almost missed hitting him like a punch to the chest. Shadow wasn't just sick. He'd been poisoned. And they'd almost let him go. Without a fight. "Start IV fluids. Broad-spectrum antibiotics. Double dose," Dr. Harper ordered, her voice clipped and urgent. The nurse moved quickly, already snapping on gloves and hanging the saline bag as Harper inserted the catheter into Shadow's leg with practiced precision. The once silent room was now filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the rustle of movement, the sound of a team refusing to surrender. Evan stood frozen for a moment, watching from the doorway as lines were hooked up, readings checked, and Shadow's fragile body was surrounded by tubes in quiet intensity. Then someone gently touched his arm and guided him out. "We'll do everything we can," they said. Now he paced the narrow hallway, drenched in fluorescent light and silence. The storm outside had slowed, but inside him, it still raged. Every memory of Shadow, charging through smoke, barking at falling trees, sitting beside him through lonely nights, rushed back in a tidal wave. He pressed his hands together, resting them against his lips. "Please," he whispered, "please fight." Shadow had once risked everything for him. Now Evan could only wait, and hope that loyalty could beat death once more. The clock on the wall blinked 3:04 a.m. The hallway was still and silent, lit only by a dim overhead light that cast long shadows on the tile floor. Evan sat hunched on a narrow bench, elbows on knees, hands clasped so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He hadn't moved in over an hour. Every creak of the floor, every hum from behind the closed treatment room door, made his breath catch. His mind kept drifting to Shadow's last embrace, the way those trembling paws had wrapped around his neck. Was that goodbye, or something else? Then finally, the door eased open. Dr. Harper stepped out, her shoulders heavy with fatigue, scrubs wrinkled, hair pulled back in a loose, tired bun. But her face carried something different. A softness, a glimmer. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at him and gave a small, weary smile. "He's responding," she said. "His heart rate is stabilizing. Temperature's coming up. He's not out of the woods, but he's fighting." Evan stared at her, disbelieving. The air left his lungs in a shaky breath. "You saved him," he whispered. "Thank you for not going through with it, for listening to whatever made you stop." Dr. Harper sat beside him, her voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes," she said, "the science tells us one thing, but your gut tells you something else. And when a soul isn't ready to go, you feel it." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "You didn't just hear a heartbeat. You heard him asking for one more chance." She smiled, and we gave it to him. The first hints of dawn crept through the frosted clinic windows, painting the walls with soft streaks of gold and gray. The storm had passed. Outside, the rain had slowed to a whisper, and the world felt quieter, like it too was waiting to exhale. Evan stood in the doorway of the treatment room, heart pounding in his chest. He barely breathed as he stepped inside. Shadow was lying on a fresh blanket, his body still frail but no longer limp. The IV line was still in place, a gentle drip feeding life back into his veins. Monitors ticked softly in the background, and then those eyes. Clear, brown, familiar. They turned slowly toward Evan, locking onto his face with quiet recognition. A flick of the tail tapped once against the blanket. Evan's breath hitched. He dropped to his knees beside the table, reaching out with trembling hands. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of everything they'd just been through. "You weren't ready to die, were you?" Shadow let out a faint, content sigh, his chest rising just a little stronger than before. And then, slowly, almost ceremoniously, he lifted one paw and placed it gently on Evan's arm. Evan froze. The pressure was light but steady, intentional. It wasn't a goodbye. It wasn't a final gesture. It was a promise. Tears spilled freely down Evan's face as he leaned forward, resting his forehead against Shadow's once again. But this time it wasn't in grief. It was in gratitude, in awe. "You stubborn, beautiful boy," he whispered, smiling through the tears. "You held on." Shadow blinked, his eyes calm and steady. The worst was over, and somewhere deep inside his battered frame, something had decided to stay. Evan stayed by his side for hours, holding that paw like a lifeline. Because it was. Shadow hadn't let go, and neither would he. This story isn't just about a dog who refused to die. It's about the kind of loyalty that transcends biology, about the bond that doesn't break even when the body does. At its heart, it's a quiet, powerful reminder. True loyalty doesn't surrender. And sometimes love and instinct outrun even the best of science. Shadow's survival wasn't scripted. It wasn't predicted. It wasn't even probable. But it happened because someone listened, because someone stayed, because neither of them let go. A past forged in fire, Evan wasn't just a dog owner. He was once a man burning physically and emotionally when Shadow pulled him out of a wildfire and gave him a second chance. That backstory infuses every scene with stakes that go far beyond the vet's table. It's not just a pet in peril, it's a soul-deep debt coming full circle. An invisible enemy, the bacterial poisoning from a seemingly harmless puddle, adds a layer of mystery and tension, transforming this from a typical farewell into a race against a hidden threat. It reminds us that danger isn't always loud, and sometimes what we miss in the small details nearly costs us everything. A vet's humanity over protocol. Dr. Harper's moment of hesitation becomes the pivot point of the entire story. She had every clinical reason to proceed. But something in her heart said wait. Her decision to follow instinct over protocol didn't just save a dog's life. It preserved a bond that had already survived fire, loss, and time. The final embrace that wasn't final. When Shadow lifted his paws and wrapped them around Evan's neck, it felt like a farewell. But in truth, it was a heartbeat of resistance. A silent declaration that he wasn't done fighting. The paw that reached back. In the end, that simple gesture, Shadow placing his paw on Evan's arm, became the story's most profound line of dialogue. No words, just contact, just presence, not a goodbye, but a promise to stay. This isn't just a survival story. It's a reminder to trust your gut, to hold on a second longer, to believe that sometimes, even when everything says it's over, something deep inside says, I'm still here. Because some bonds are more than flesh and blood. They are made of fire, trust, and the quiet courage to wait for one more heartbeat.